The quarantine ward's atmospheric seal hissed its final warning. Doctor. Sarah Chen stood at the threshold, her reflection ghostly in the transparent barrier separating her from certain death. Beyond the seal, a small figure lay motionless on a medical platform designed for beings twice her size. The child's russet fur had lost its sheen, matted with fever sweat. Her breathing came in shallow gasps that barely moved her chest. Doctor, you cannot enter. Commander Vex's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. The Calarian officer stood 3 meters tall, her crystalline exoskeleton refracting the station's emergency lights into fragments of red across the corridor walls. The Vulpine plague has a 98% mortality rate for all species. You have no immunity.
You have no treatment. You have nothing but a death wish.
Sarah's fingers trembled against the access panel. The child inside was 7 years old. Her name was Kira, daughter of Ambassador Thelvan, and she was the last, the only survivor of a diplomatic convoy that had carried 247 Vulpine delegates to the Galactic Council's emergency summit. The plague had moved through them like wildfire through dry grass, burning out lives in hours. The medical staff had watched helplessly as adults, children, elders, all of them collapsed and died, their bodies rejecting every treatment, every intervention. Her vitals are dropping. Sarah's voice was steady, despite the ice flooding her veins. The monitoring system painted the child's declining condition in unforgiving data streams. Heart rate erratic, temperature critical, oxygen saturation plummeting. She has maybe 20 minutes. Then she has 20 minutes. Commander Vex moved closer, her footsteps silent despite her mass. Dr. Chen, I have sealed this ward on the authority of the Galactic Health Directorate. That seal exists to prevent the spread of an extinction-level pathogen. One child's life does not justify risking billions. Sarah's hand hovered over the override sequence she'd spent the last 3 hours decoding. The station's security systems were formidable, designed to contain threats that could sterilize worlds. Breaking the quarantine seal would trigger alerts across 17 sectors. It would end her career. It would likely end her life. Behind Commander Vex, the observation gallery had filled with silent witnesses. Queen Seralith of the Vulpine Confederacy stood motionless, her regal bearing compromised by the tremor in her elongated fingers. She wore the traditional mourning silver, the metal bands tight around her throat and wrists. Her eyes, golden and ancient, fixed on the small form beyond the barrier. Her daughter lay dying, and protocol demanded she watch from safety while the last ember of her bloodline guttered out. I can stabilize her. Sarah pulled a compact medical case from her coat. Inside, 17 vials of synthesized compounds glinted under the harsh lights. I've analyzed the plague's protein structure. It's a cascade failure. The pathogen doesn't kill directly. It triggers an autoimmune response that burns through neural tissue. But human immunoglobulin proteins have a different binding structure. If I can introduce a controlled human infection vector, use my antibodies as a template. You're describing using yourself as a living laboratory. Commander Vex's tone carried no judgment, only fact. You're describing deliberate exposure to a pathogen that will liquefy your nervous system within 4 hours. You're describing an untested hypothesis with no data, no trials, no evidence beyond theoretical models. I'm describing the only chance she has. Sarah entered the first 3 digits of the override code. I'm describing what I swore to do when I became a doctor. A new voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. Let her enter! Queen Seralith's words were barely above a whisper, but every being in the corridor froze. She descended from the observation gallery with movements that spoke of a lifetime commanding armies and negotiating treaties. Her silver mourning bands chimed softly with each step. Commander Vex, I acknowledge your authority in matters of quarantine protocol. I also invoke my sovereign right under Treaty 7 of the Galactic Compact. This human doctor volunteers for a medical intervention within sealed containment. She risks only her own life. The risk is hers to take. Commander Vex's crystalline features revealed nothing, but her stance shifted infinitesimally. Your Majesty, with respect, if Dr. Chen fails, my daughter dies, and the plague dies with her. The ward remains sealed. The pathogen remains contained. The Queen's voice carried the hollowness of someone who had already counted the cost. If Dr. Chen succeeds, we gain knowledge that might save others. Either way, Commander, your quarantine holds. The atmospheric seal disengaged with a sound like a sigh, like a confession, like a door closing on everything she'd been before this moment. The air that rushed past her carried the sharp tang of disinfectant, and beneath it the subtle wrongness of the plague itself, a smell like copper and burnt sugar. 20 minutes, she whispered to herself, stepping across the threshold. Behind her, the seal re-engaged immediately, trapping her inside with death and a dying child and the desperate mathematics of human biology against an alien apocalypse. The barrier solidified, absolute, and final. Through its transparency, she saw Queen Seralith's hand pressed against the surface, and she saw the monarch's lips move in what might have been prayer or curse or simple acknowledgement of sacrifice. Kira's eyes fluttered open as Sarah approached. They were amber, flecked with green, and filled with the terrible clarity of a child who understood she was dying. Sarah knelt beside the platform, her medical case already open, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of 15 years in emergency medicine. The first vial contained synthesized human plasma proteins. The second held a cocktail of immunomodulators. The third was the gamble, a live sample of her own blood, deliberately exposed to trace elements of the plague pathogen, weaponized against itself. "My name is Sarah," she said softly, preparing the injection sequence. "I'm going to help you, but I need you to be very brave." Kira's voice was a thread of sound. "Are you going to die?" Sarah's hands didn't falter as she inserted the first IV line. "I don't know, but if I do, it won't be alone." Through the barrier, Queen Seralith watched a human doctor begin the procedure that would save or condemn them both, and the galaxy held its breath. The first injection burned through Kira's system like liquid fire. Sarah monitored the child's vital signs while simultaneously running diagnostics on her own blood chemistry. She'd given herself a localized exposure, enough to trigger antibody production, not enough to initiate cascade failure. The theory was sound. The science was solid. The margin for error was non-existent. "Talk to me, Kira. Tell me about your home." Sarah's voice remained calm while her neural implant streamed data directly to her vision. Kira's temperature spiked 2 degrees, then plateaued. Her heart rate steadied slightly. The autoimmune markers showed marginal improvement. Marginal wasn't enough, but it was movement in the right direction. "The forests." Kira's words came between labored breaths. "They sing at sunset. The trees are silver and they chime when the wind blows, Mama says." She stopped, her small face contorting with pain. Sarah administered the second injection, watching the child's pupils for the telltale dilation that would indicate neural deterioration. "Your mama is watching. She's right outside. She hasn't left you for a second." The words were simple comfort, but they mattered. In the galaxy of advanced technology and interstellar civilizations, the bond between mother and child remained the fundamental constant. The monitoring system shrieked a warning. Kira's body was rejecting the treatment. Her immune system, already hyperactive from the plague, recognized the human proteins as foreign invaders. Sarah had anticipated this, had hoped to manage it with immunosuppressants, but the child's reaction was catastrophic, too fast, too aggressive. There was no time for careful titration, no room for conservative medicine. Sarah grabbed the third vial, her own modified blood, and made a choice that defied every protocol, every guideline, every rational calculation of risk versus benefit. She injected it directly into Kira's central nervous system. The child convulsed. Alarm screamed. Through the barrier, Sarah heard Queen Seralith's anguished cry, felt Commander Vex moving toward the emergency protocols that would flood the ward with sterilizing radiation.
15 seconds to save a life or condemn it.
Sarah placed her hands on Kira's chest and felt the small heart stuttering beneath fur and flesh in the terrible fragility of hope. "Come on," she whispered. "Come on, little one, fight." Kira's back arched. Her eyes rolled back. For 3 eternal seconds, the monitoring system flatlined, and Sarah felt the weight of failure crushing her chest, felt the universe narrowing to this single point of loss. Her eyes focused. The monitoring system recalibrated, and Sarah watched in disbelief as the autoimmune markers began to drop. Not slowly, not gradually, but rapidly, cascading downward as human antibodies bound to Vulpine proteins, creating a hybrid immune response that the plague pathogen couldn't recognize or attack. "Dr. Chen!" Commander Vex's voice carried an edge Sarah had never heard before. Something that might have been wonder. "Your temperature is rising." She could feel the fever building, could feel the plague awakening in her own bloodstream, could feel the countdown beginning in her cells. She'd given herself a controlled exposure, but control was an illusion when dealing with extinction-level pathogens. The plague had her scent now, and it was hungry. "How long?" She kept her voice level, kept her hands steady as she continued monitoring Kira's improvement. Based on your current rate of infection, you have approximately 2 hours before cascade failure becomes irreversible. Commander Vex's words were clinical, but her posture had changed. She stood differently now, watching Sarah with what might have been respect. Doctor, we can flood the ward with medical nanites. We can attempt aggressive intervention. The child's brain patterns were normalizing, the damage reversing as the hybrid antibodies repaired synaptic connections. Any intervention risks disrupting the treatment. Kira needs another 90 minutes of observation to ensure the antibodies stabilize. I can give her that.
At what cost?
Queen Seralith's voice trembled. She stood pressed against the barrier, her silver bands reflecting Sarah's image back at her. Dr. Chen, you are saving my daughter's life. I cannot ask you to die for this. You're not asking. Sarah managed a smile, despite the fever beginning to claw at her thoughts. I'm volunteering. There's a difference. The second hour was harder. Sarah's hands began to shake as her own nervous system came under assault. The plague was efficient, elegant in its lethality. It had evolved on a world where survival meant absolute ruthlessness, where mercy was a weakness evolution couldn't afford. It attacked neural tissue with precision, unraveling complex thought patterns, destroying the architecture of consciousness one synapse at a time. But Sarah had spent 15 years in emergency medicine. She'd learned to function through exhaustion, through fear, through the constant pressure of holding life and death in fallible human hands. She documented everything, every reading, every observation, every nuance of Kira's recovery and her own decline. The data would be valuable. It would help others. It would mean something beyond this moment, this ward, this small tragedy transformed into smaller hope. Kira's eyes tracked Sarah's movements now, clear and focused. The child's fur had regained some of its luster, and her breathing came smooth and even. She was young enough that her body had rebounded with remarkable speed, the resilience of youth combined with the power of the hybrid treatment. She would live. That certainty settled into Sarah's bones with the weight of accomplishment and the lightness of purpose fulfilled. Dr. Chen. Commander Vex's tone had shifted again, carrying urgency. We're detecting something unusual in your blood chemistry. The plague markers are changing. The data made no sense. Her antibody production had spiked exponentially. The human proteins weren't just binding to the plague pathogen. They were adapting, evolving, creating increasingly sophisticated countermeasures. It was as if her immune system had learned from Kira's recovery and was now waging its own war against the infection. That's impossible, Sarah whispered. Human immune systems don't adapt that fast. We don't have the genetic flexibility. You do now. A new voice joined the conversation. Dr. Ixthal, the station's chief xenobiologist, appeared beside Commander Vex. His insectoid features were unreadable, but his compound eyes reflected fascination. Dr. Chen, you created a hybrid treatment using your blood and Vulpine physiology. But the exchange wasn't one-directional. When you injected your modified blood into the child, you created a feedback loop. Her immune response is now influencing yours. You're experiencing cross-species immune adaptation in real time. Sarah's fever was dropping. She could feel it, could feel her body stabilizing, could feel something fundamentally changing in her cellular structure. The plague was dying in her bloodstream, overwhelmed by an immune response that had never existed before, that shouldn't exist, that was rewriting the rules of xenobiology with every passing second. The child saved you back, Queen Seralith breathed. You saved her, and she saved you. Kira's small hand found Sarah's. The child's grip was weak but steady, and her amber eyes held understanding beyond her years. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for not leaving me alone. Sarah squeezed back gently, feeling tears track down her cheeks. They were tears of exhaustion, of relief, of the overwhelming rush of survival when death had seemed certain. You're welcome, little one. You're so very welcome. Commander Vex initiated the decontamination sequence. It would take 6 hours to certify the ward as plague-free, another 12 to run full verification protocols. But the crisis had passed. The extinction-level pathogen had met something it couldn't defeat. Human stubbornness combined with cross-species compassion wrapped in the desperate mathematics of a doctor's oath. The observation gallery filled with quiet conversation. Beings from a dozen species discussing the implications of what they'd witnessed. Dr. Ixthal was already requesting permission to study Sarah's blood, to analyze the hybrid antibodies, to understand this unprecedented xenobiological phenomenon. The data could revolutionize medicine, could provide tools against other cross-species pathogens, could save countless lives across the galaxy. But for now, in the quarantine ward that had become a cradle for miracles, Sarah sat beside Kira and watched the child sleep. The fever dreams had passed. The danger had receded. The small chest rose and fell with the steady rhythm of healing, and Sarah felt something uncurl in her own chest. The tight fear that had driven her through the last 3 hours, replaced now by simple gratitude. Queen Saralith remained at the barrier, her posture no longer that of a monarch watching her dynasty end, but of a mother witnessing her daughter's salvation. She met Sarah's eyes through the transparent seal, and no words were necessary. The understanding passed between them, profound and simple. A child lived who should have died, and the universe had bent around that truth, creating new possibilities from desperation and courage. As the station's night cycle dimmed the corridor lights, Sarah's implant chimed with incoming messages. Medical journals requesting her data, research institutions offering collaboration, the Galactic Health Directorate demanding a full report on her reckless violation of quarantine protocols. She ignored them all, maintaining her vigil beside the small patient who had become something more. Evidence that between different species, different worlds, different forms of life, the fundamental mathematics of compassion remained constant. The plague had been defeated not by superior technology or advanced science, but by a simple human truth. When a child is dying, you don't calculate odds. You don't measure risk against benefit. You don't stand safely outside and watch. You step across the threshold. You offer your hand. You say, in words or actions, or the language of presence itself, I'm here. You're not alone. We'll face this together. Commander Vex authorized the first stage of decontamination, and nanites flooded the ward in a silver mist that consumed every trace of the pathogen. Sarah breathed it in, felt it sweep through her lungs, felt the final confirmation that she would live to practice medicine another day. Kira stirred slightly, reaching for Sarah's hand even in sleep, and Sarah held on, knowing that this moment, this small victory in an infinite universe, would define everything that came after. The lone survivor of the Vulpine plague slept peacefully, her breathing steady, her future restored. And the human doctor who had risked all sat beside her in the settling quiet, watching the stars wheel past the viewport, considering the strange mathematics of sacrifice and survival, and understanding finally that some equations had no numbers, only the simple certainty of yes or no, action or inaction, courage or its absence. The child lived. The galaxy had witnessed. And nothing would ever be quite the same.